I watched my daughter-in-law pour something onto my wife's chair at my son's rehearsal dinner. And for a second, I thought I was seeing things. It was a Friday evening in late September, the kind of evening where the air finally starts to cool down after a brutal Texas summer, and you almost feel like things might be okay. My wife, June, had spent 2 hours getting ready. She'd bought a new dress, Dusty Rose, she called it, and she was so happy. Our son was getting married the next day. We'd waited a long time for this. June has rheumatoid arthritis, has had it for 11 years. Some days are better than others, but she never complains. She just adjusts. Walks a little slower. Holds on to my arm in parking lots. Takes the elevator when there are stairs. She doesn't make a big deal out of it, and I love her for that. Even though sometimes I wish she'd let people know she's not being dramatic, she's just in pain. My son Elliot met his fiancée Amber about 3 years ago. I'll be honest, I tried. I really did. June tried harder than I did. She invited Amber to Thanksgiving that first year, asked about her job, her family, remembered the name of her childhood dog. Amber wasn't cold, exactly. She was just calculated, like she was doing math every time she was in the room with us, figuring out what things cost and whether they were worth her time. Elliot's always been a little bit blind where she's concerned. I think that's love, or some version of it. You don't see what you don't want to see. I understand that. I was 24 once, but he was 41, and I guess I expected more. The rehearsal dinner was at a private room in a steakhouse in Dallas. Amber's parents, her father's in commercial real estate, her mother does something with event planning, had rented out the whole back section, about 40 people, round tables with white linens, candles, the whole thing. June had been looking forward to it for weeks. We got there a few minutes early. I do that out of habit. June wanted to find our seats, take a breath, get settled before the room filled up. The seating cards were already out. Little ivory rectangles with calligraphy. Ours were at the second table from the front. Parents of the groom. Good placement, I thought. June found hers and pulled the chair back slightly to peek at the cushion, the way she always does, making sure it's the right height for her. I went to find the men's room. I was gone maybe 4 minutes. When I came back around the corner, I stopped. Amber was standing behind June's chair. Her back was mostly to me, but I could see what she was doing. She had a small tube in her hand, the kind you'd recognize anywhere once you've used it, and she was pressing something along the back edge of the seat cushion, quick and deliberate, like she'd done it before, or at least thought it through. Elliot was standing 2 feet away. He saw me. He looked right at me. Then he looked away. I stood there for what felt like a long time but was probably 4 seconds. The whole room was buzzing. People arriving, hugging, waitstaff moving around with glasses of sparkling water. No one else was watching. Or if they were, they didn't understand what they were seeing. I understood. June can't stand up quickly. That's the thing about rheumatoid arthritis. It's not just about walking. It's joints, it's inflammation, it's the way your body fights itself. If she sat down on that cushion and it bonded to her dress, she wouldn't just be embarrassed. She could twist wrong trying to get up. She could fall. She's had 2 surgeries in the last 4 years. 1 wrong movement, and we're looking at months of recovery, not days. Amber knew this. We talked about June's condition more than once. I know she knew. I didn't say anything. I walked to the bar, ordered a club soda, and stood there for a minute watching the room. I thought about walking straight over and saying something. I thought about pulling Elliot aside. I thought about a lot of things. But here's what I've learned in 63 years. When you react in a room full of people, you're the one who ends up looking like the problem. Amber knew that too. She was counting on it. She was counting on the fact that even if I said something, June would be mortified. I'd look paranoid, and she could smile and say she was just straightening the chair. So I didn't react, not the way she expected. I waited until I saw Amber move toward her own seat, chatting with her mother, back turned. I walked back to our table, sat down next to June's empty chair. She was talking to Elliot's aunt across the room, and I looked at the cushion. You could see it if you knew to look. The edge was slightly tacky, colorless, almost invisible. I picked up our seating cards, mine and June's. I walked around to the other side of the table, to the two empty chairs across from ours, and I swapped them. Moved the cards, straightened everything so it looked right. The chairs across were standard wooden ones, no upholstered cushion. I came back, sat down in my new seat, and folded my hands on the table. June came back a few minutes later, a little flushed and happy from talking. She looked at the cards, looked at me. "Did we move?" she said. "I wanted us to face the room better," I said. "Better view." She looked at the other side of the table, at the candles, at the room filling up. "That is nicer," she said, and she sat down. Amber and Elliot took their seats at the head table. I watched Amber glance over at our side of the table, just for a second. Her eyes went to the chair, June's original chair, and then moved away. She smiled at something someone said to her. The dinner went fine. It was a nice evening, actually, aside from everything. The food was good. June laughed a lot. Toasts were made. Amber's father told a long story about a fishing trip that had nothing to do with Elliot, but everyone politely smiled through it. At some point during dessert, Amber's college roommate, a tall woman named something I can't remember, pulled out the chair that had been meant for June and sat down to talk to the person next to her. She was only sitting half in it, perched on the edge, leaning forward. She stood up about 20 minutes later without any trouble. The adhesive, whatever was on there, either hadn't fully set in the spot she was sitting or it just didn't catch her dress the way it would have caught June's. I thought about that on the drive home. How June had been wearing a fine knit fabric, how it would have bonded perfectly, how she would have stood up when people started moving and there would have been that moment, that awful moment where she couldn't understand why she couldn't get up, and then she'd have pulled, and everyone would have seen, and she would have been so humiliated. And the laughter. I know the kind of laughter it would have been. I didn't sleep much that night. The wedding the next day was at a venue outside of Dallas, a converted ranch property with big oak trees and string lights and a white tent. It was genuinely beautiful. June wore a light blue dress and her good pearl earrings. She'd had her hair done that morning. Walking to our seats, she held my arm and said, "I'm so happy, Richard," and I held it together. I did. The ceremony was short and honestly lovely. The vows were real, not the generic ones, actual words they'd written. I'll give Amber that. She looked at my son like she meant it, at least in that moment. The reception was in the tent. Long tables, lots of flowers, a band that was too loud but played well. The seating arrangements had us at the family table. First table, closest to where the bride and groom would sit. June found her card immediately, happy to be close to the front. I'd gotten there an hour early. I told June I needed to talk to the venue coordinator about parking. There had been a mix-up with the shuttle, I said, something I'd gotten a text about. She believed me. I kissed her cheek and went inside. I found the seating chart that the wedding coordinator had set up on an easel near the entrance. I found the table layout for the head table. The bride and groom were center. To Amber's right, her maid of honor. To her left, the best man. Then, 2 seats down from the best man, a single seat marked for the mother of the groom. June's seat. But there was a second name card tucked behind June's at that same position. Amber's cousin Faye, written in smaller script, almost like a backup. I didn't touch the head table cards. But I walked over to the family table and I looked carefully at every chair. At the upholstered ones. At the wooden ones. At the cushions. One chair, the one with June's place card, had a cushion that didn't match the others. It was slightly newer looking, a different shade of ivory. I ran my hand along the back edge. My stomach dropped. She'd done it again. I don't know when. Sometime before or during setup, I assume. The venue staff wouldn't have known to look. I stood there in that empty tent, with the string lights off and the tables half-dressed and the whole place smelling like fresh flowers. And I thought about my wife. I thought about the fact that she'd had 3 surgeries, that she takes 8 pills a morning, that she still makes me coffee every day without being asked. That she cried when Elliot got his first job, and she called me at work to tell me, and her voice was so full of pride I had to step into a stairwell so no one would see me. I thought about my son standing 2 feet away at that rehearsal dinner and looking right at me and then looking away. I swapped the chair. I pulled the tampered chair from June's spot and moved it 3 tables back to a table near the side entrance that was set for some of Amber's extended family. I took a plain wooden chair from a nearby table, no cushion, no upholstery, and placed it at June's spot. I moved her place card. I made it look right. Then I found a regular cushioned chair, untampered, and I sat in it for a moment just to steady myself. The wedding coordinator found me in there a few minutes later. She asked if everything was okay. I told her I'd been checking the flowers. She looked at me a little funny, but let it go. June never knew. She sat down at her spot during dinner, looked around the tent, touched the centerpiece flowers, and said the whole place was beautiful. She was right. It was. The evening moved the way weddings do. Courses, toasts, the first dance, then the floor opening up. June danced with me twice and with Elliot once, a slow song, and I watched them from the side and tried to just let myself have that moment. The reception was about 2 hours in when the band's MC, the lead singer, a guy who'd been working the crowd all evening, announced he wanted to honor the couple one more time before the cake cutting. He asked everyone at the head table to stand. I was at the family table. June was next to me. I watched. The maid of honor stood. The best man stood. Elliot stood. And then Amber stood, or tried to. She got about halfway up. There was a sound. Not loud, not a ripping exactly, more like a thick tearing, fabric under tension. Amber froze. She looked down. She grabbed at the chair with both hands. One of her bridesmaids noticed and leaned in, confused, and then Amber did stand, fully, and the chair came with her, or part of it did. A full section of her dress's skirt, the bottom layer of tulle in the inner lining, stayed attached to the seat. The back of her dress was, it's hard to describe, intact in the sense that the gown was still mostly there, but the structured underlayer was exposed, the inner boning visible, and where the skirt had separated from the lining, there was just a gap. Amber stood there holding the chair, trying to understand what had happened, and the room went from murmuring to silence to a kind of collective uncomfortable confusion. Her mother rushed forward. Her maid of honor stepped in front of her. One of the bridesmaids pulled a shawl from somewhere, maybe her own wrap, and tried to get it around Amber's waist. The MC had already moved on, bless him, making some joke to fill the space, but the damage was done. Everyone had seen. Elliot was pale. He put his arm around Amber, and they were walked quickly through a side door by the coordinator. They were gone for about 45 minutes. When they came back, Amber had changed into a second dress, a simpler one that I later learned she'd had on standby, which apparently is a thing brides do now. She was smiling like nothing had happened, but her face was tight. Her eyes weren't right. The rest of the evening finished out quietly. People danced. Cake was cut. I kept June close, and we were among the last to leave. In the car driving home, June said, "That was such a strange thing with Amber's dress." "Yeah," I said. "Do you think the chair was defective?" "Could be," I said. June was quiet for a minute. Then she said, "I hope it didn't ruin her night." That's my wife. It wasn't until a week later that things started to unravel properly. The venue had done an incident review. I found this out through Elliot, who called me on a Tuesday evening sounding strained. The coordinator had apparently noticed the swap chair after the fact and flagged it in her notes. She'd also found the original chair, the tampered one, at the side table and had recognized that the substance on it wasn't something that would have come from their facility. I don't know who told what to whom after that. What I know is that Elliot called me, and he asked directly if I had anything to do with the chair situation. I told him yes. There was a long silence on the phone. Then he said, "What did you do?" I told him everything. I told him about the rehearsal dinner. I told him about watching his wife treat June like a problem to be solved. I told him about what could have happened, what the adhesive could have done to his mother, a woman who has had 3 joint surgeries, who cannot simply bounce back from a fall, who takes immunosuppressants that slow her healing. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "I thought it was a joke." I said, "Elliot." He said, "I know." He knew. He's known for a while what Amber is capable of. I think on some level he's been hoping I didn't. I think he thought if I didn't say anything, it had stayed in a category he could keep separate. Something he could tell himself didn't count. That counts. I told him that very clearly. I told him that I loved him and that I was not going to pretend otherwise. But that what his wife had done was not a prank. It was not jealousy. It was not nerves. It was deliberate harm intended for his mother, who has never once spoken a harsh word about her, and that he had stood there and watched and said nothing. He was quiet again. When he spoke, his voice was different, flatter, like something had gone out of it. He said, "She's going to be furious." "I expect so," I said. "She's saying the venue ruined her dress." "The venue can say what it knows." There was another pause. "Dad," he said, "what do you want me to do?" I told him I didn't want anything from him, not right now. I wanted him to sit with it, to think about who he was, who he wanted to be, and whether the man he was trying to be was someone he'd be proud of in 10 years, whether he was the kind of man who could watch someone hurt his mother and file it under joke. I told him I'd always be his father. That wouldn't change. But that some things can't be set back to zero just by not talking about them. We got off the phone, and I sat in the kitchen for a while. June was in the other room watching one of her shows. I could hear the television. I could hear her laugh at something. 3 weeks after the wedding, I got a letter, actual paper, which surprised me. It was from Amber, 2 pages, handwritten. I won't reproduce what she wrote, but the main thrust of it was that she'd been under extraordinary pressure, that she never intended for anyone to be seriously hurt, that she was deeply sorry for the pain she'd caused. I read it twice. Then I put it in the drawer. I haven't responded yet. I'm not sure I will. Not soon. Some apologies need time to find out if they're real. You can't tell from the first draft. Elliot came over for dinner last month. He came alone. June made her pot roast. We sat at the kitchen table, just the 3 of us, the way it used to be, and we talked for a long time about nothing important. Football, the garden, a road trip June wants to take in the spring, up through the Smokies. When he left, he stood in the doorway for a second and looked at me the way he used to when he was maybe 9 or 10. That look kids have when they're trying to figure something out they don't have words for yet. He said, "I'm sorry, Dad." I said, "I know, son." He hugged his mother for a long time before he got in his car. I still don't know what's going to happen with their marriage. That's not mine to decide, and I've stopped trying to predict it. What I know is that my wife has no idea she was ever in danger. She danced at her son's wedding, and she cried happy tears during the vows. And on the drive home, she held my hand across the center console and said it was one of the best days she'd had in years. I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure she keeps having days like that. That's the job. That's always been the job. And I'll be there, same as always. Quiet, paying attention, one step ahead of whatever comes next. I've been sitting with this story for a while now, turning it over the way you do with things that don't fully resolve themselves, because this one hasn't, not completely. What strikes me most, looking back, isn't the wedding. It isn't even the chair. It's the rehearsal dinner. The moment I came around that corner and saw what I saw, and Elliot looked at me and looked away. That's the image I keep coming back to, not Amber, Elliot, because Amber did what Amber did, and as hard as that is to accept, people sometimes show you exactly who they are when they think no one's watching. What I wasn't prepared for was my own son being the one who was watching and choosing silence. I think about what it cost him to make that choice, and I think about what it would have cost June if I hadn't made mine. Here's what I've come to believe. Doing the right thing in a quiet room with no one watching, when it would be so much easier to walk back to the bar and pretend you didn't see anything. That's the whole test. Not the big moments, not the speeches or the gestures, the 4 seconds when you have to decide what kind of person you actually are. I didn't say anything. I didn't make a scene, I just moved a chair. But I moved it with full knowledge of what I was doing and why, and I'd do it again without hesitation. That's what I want Elliot to understand if he gets to a place where he can hear it. Character isn't what you do when people are looking. It's what you do at a rehearsal dinner on a Friday night in September when your wife is across the room laughing and doesn't know she needs protecting. And it takes something more than just knowing right from wrong. It takes the clear-headedness to think through what you're actually dealing with. I could have reacted on emotion. I wanted to. But emotion would have made me the story, and June needed me to be the solution. You have to be able to read a situation, stay calm inside the noise of it, and figure out what actually works. That's not coldness. That's the discipline of caring about the outcome more than you care about being seen. To care. The part I didn't expect was how much it would take out of me. Not the doing of it, the carrying of it. Knowing something your wife doesn't know. Watching her dance at her son's wedding, completely happy, while you're holding all of it alone. There were moments that night when I wanted to sit down and just be tired, but you don't get to put it down, not when it matters. You carry it because the alternative is worse. That's what it means to protect somebody, not the dramatic version, but the real one, the one that costs you something and nobody ever thanks you for. June is fine. She danced. She cried. She held my hand on the drive home. That's worth everything. I don't know what happens next with Elliot and Amber. I don't know if that letter in my drawer deserves a response yet. What I know is that the people in our lives will sometimes disappoint us in ways we didn't see coming. And the measure of who we are is what we do inside that disappointment. Whether we shrink from it, or whether we stay steady and keep showing up. I'm still here, still paying attention, still one step ahead when I need to be. That's the job. That's always been the job.